We begin our brief look at this commentary on the Gongchik composed by Khenpo Kunpal. It's a very short commentary, but actually quite easy as an introduction to Gongchik to start with this particular commentary. So we were, let me see. We looked at the second Vajra statement from chapter 1, that commentary. I think we looked at that already. Now, let's look at statement 3. We actually started statement 3, but statement 3, the commentary, Khenpo Kunpal begins with a quote from the Vajra Tantra, which says, "First, one should give the 24-hour vows to disciples. After that, the 10 topics of training. Then one should teach them the philosophy of the proponents of distinctions. Then likewise the philosophy of the sutra followers. Then the mind-only philosophy of yogic practice. After that, one should teach them the middle way. Later, when they know all the stages of mantrayana, they can begin with the Vajra." And so this is a fairly famous quote from the Vajra Tantra, one of the key tantras that became really important in India and subsequently in Tibet. And this quote in the Vajra Tantra tells us that for the best scenario is that someone should gradually learn all these various stages kind of in this systematic way before they finally engage in the practice as taught in the Vajra Tantra. So using this quote, Khenpo Kunpal explains the third Vajra statement. And the third Vajra statement in the root text, it says, which as I pointed out, Khenpo Kunpal doesn't necessarily give us just the Vajra statement. Khenpo Kunpal's and many other commentaries, the Vajra statement is the words from the statement is kind of worked into the commentary. But because the students, when they come listen to the teachings, they have already memorized the root, the statement being unpacked, so then they get it. But for us, probably forget about having memorized, maybe haven't even heard of the Vajra statement before. So anyway, the Vajra statement is, the collection of teachings and the classes of tantras are the stages of the path. Like they constitute what is known as stages of the path. Lamrim. Lamrim is the Tibetan word for that. These days, the word Lamrim is especially associated with the Gelugpa lineage because the founder of that lineage emphasizes a lot and wrote, in fact, a very extensive and detailed text called the Great Lamrim. So Rinpoche Lama Tsongkhapa wrote this very important stages of the path text that he calls the Great Exposition on the Stages of the Path, Lamrim Chenmo. But more generally, Lamrim refers to an approach to learning and practicing the Buddha's teachings, going by step, stage by stage. There is another text, another type of text closely related to Lamrim, and often also called Lamrim, but sometimes they are called Tenrim. Ten is, like here in this context, ten refers to teachings or doctrine. So stages of doctrine, Tenrim rather than Lamrim. Lam is path. But sometimes Tenrim is simply considered as a type of Lamrim. But the distinction here is Tenrim is more concerned with providing you all the conceptual understanding. So the theory. Whereas Lamrim includes also the practice side. Tenrim more often is focused on the theory, with the understanding that having a good, clear theoretical understanding is good and important for practice. So Gampopa's jewel ornament of liberation, technically, is a type of Tenrim rather than Lamrim. Anyway, here it says, the collection of teachings as found in the sutras and the classes of tantras. In the tantra generally, they say there are 4 classes of tantras. Action tantra, performance tantra, yoga tantra, unexcelled yoga tantra, or highest yoga tantra. And then in the Nyingma system, these 4 are divided into 6, whereby the first 3 remains the same: action tantra, performance tantra, yoga tantra. Then the next 3, what is here, the unexcelled yoga, they divide it into Maha Yoga, Anu Yoga, and Ati Yoga. And that's how they get 6. For those who say it's the 4th is the highest yoga or unexcelled yoga, sometimes they do divide this further into 3, but they call it Father Yoga, Mother Yoga, and non-dual yoga. Father Yoga, Mother Yoga, and non-dual yoga. In the Nyingma, when they divide this last one into 3, they divide it as Maha Yoga, Anu Yoga, and Ati Yoga. So here at Khenpo Kunpal, coming back to Khenpo Kunpal, if you have the book, I'm on page 108. It says the 3 collections of teachings, meaning the 3 collections, the Tripitaka in the sutra system, which is the sutras, the Vinaya, and the Abhidharma. The 3 collections of teachings and the 4 classes of tantras are methods for developing all the stages of the path in our mind streams. Thus, this Vajra statement teaches that one needs to practice the stages of the teachings without mixing the order from the bottom upward, starting with the Vinaya. On Friday, I already read this, but I missed that this is for statement number 3. So statement number 3 follows from statement number 2. Statement number 2 says the 84,000 groups of Dharma teachings, they are all antidotes to the 84,000 afflictions. And they are all required for the accomplishment of Buddhahood. Then more detailed, statement 3 says, more specifically, the 3 collections, the 3 baskets, the Tripitaka, and the 4 collections of tantras, they are given in a gradual way, so that the best way to approach this is to follow that order. So here it says to practicing. Here Khenpo Kunpal says, practice the stages of the teachings without mixing the order from bottom upward. And so here I think on Friday I say, here I will have a slight kind of quibble, a slight disagreement, and say, not always, generally yes, because there are other places you'll see where Jigten Singman says, well, the order of things can also be done a little differently. So for example, not in this context of the Tripitaka and the four tantras, but for example, in the usual division of things into Shila, ethical conduct, Samadhi, meditative concentration, and Prajna, primordial wisdom. These are called the three trainings. Trainings in Shila, ethical conduct, training in meditative concentration, and then training in wisdom. Conventionally, it says, everyone agrees that the order in which these three trainings are to be done is begin with ethical conduct, and then when you are able to act and behave ethically, meaning, minimizing harming yourself, harming others, the essence of ethical conduct, then quite naturally your mind can be settled, can stabilize. Then when the mind settles and is stable, even, not easily distracted, then it can very easily become the basis for developing wisdom. Yeah? But elsewhere in Vajra Statement, Kyoba Rinpoche says, well, it can actually be done differently, depending on beings and their capacities. He says, sometimes you can start from the direction of wisdom. That you recognize, something like a teaching on emptiness. Even before your mind is stable, and you have not perfected ethical conduct, you might hear something and go, oh, and you really get it, So wisdom. And because of that wisdom, right, your mind drop all its distractions, become stable. Then with a stable mind, you can apply it to a very scrupulous, a very careful attention to your actions of body, speech, and mind, which is the training in ethical conduct. And he says sometimes you can also begin with meditative concentration. Because the mind has become stable, then you can practice ethical conduct very clearly. And the more you practice ethical conduct clearly, the more you understand the wisdom, the cause and effect that is involved. Okay? Actually, this is a later Vajra statement. But just to say, here, statement 3 needs to be read alongside some other statements, so that you don't just look at 3 and say, oh, Kyopa says, you have to do it in this order. Generally, yes, but not in a fixed way. Anyway, statement 4. Quote, the 3 Dharma wheels are, unquote, also taught according to, quote, the different understandings of the trainee followers. More or less, this is the 4th statement. But if you look at the 4th statement, it says, the 3 Dharma wheels are taught for the different realizations of the followers. So here, Khenpo Kunpal's words is the different understandings of those to be trained. And so he goes on. If one teaches emptiness and the unfathomable actual reality of freedom from elaboration to those with low faculties from the very beginning, they will reject it. And so this is Khenpo Rinpoche saying, insofar that there are the three turnings of the Dharma wheel, they were done for the benefit of those who are to be trained in accordance to what is most appropriate to them, what will not cause them to become confused or even panic. If from the beginning, from the get-go, you tell somebody, about emptiness, even if you're very skilled at explaining emptiness, which many of us are not, but even if you're very skilled at explaining what emptiness is, if you introduce it too early, it will cause the person you are sharing this teaching with some misunderstandings or maybe some fear. So you should not start like that. Therefore, the Buddha first taught the four truths of the Noble Ones in the first turning, mainly in order to dispel the extreme view of nihilism. And he further taught the emptiness of all phenomena in the second view to clear away the extreme view of permanence. Then, in order to dispel further doubts about existence and non-existence, the Buddha taught in the third Dharma wheel the definitive meaning, the emptiness that is the profound, peaceful, unelaborated, and uncompounded actual reality. So here, again, I think we already covered, I'm forgetting this, but it's good to go over again. I said here in the commentary, the word definitive, when he says the third turning of the wheel. You notice how Khenpo Kunpal, the first turning of the wheel, he did not use that word definitive meaning. Second turning of the wheel, he did not use definitive meaning. But for the third turning, he says the definitive meaning of emptiness, that is the profound, peaceful, unelaborated, and uncompounded actual reality. So here again, I will have a slight comment here, which is we should know from, and we know, I think many of you are looking at who's in Zoom today. Many of us know that for Khenpo Rinpoche, elsewhere in the Gongchik, he says, all the teachings of the Buddha are to be understood as definitive, which is a kind of an odd thing to say, because other Buddhist teachers and traditions will say, well, you need to know how to divide or how to read the Buddha's teachings so that you know that, oh, this teaching is definitive, meaning this is final. No more like interpreting, no more like trying to explain it through other teachings. So then the implication is that if there are definitive teachings, then there are non-definitive teachings, meaning that these non-definitive teachings are somehow not complete, still needs to be improved, and to be improved later. Khenpo Rinpoche says, well, actually, everything the Buddha taught, they are definitive. Meaning they are definitive to who he is teaching it to. Right? He doesn't hide anything. And even he says, even when you say it's not definitive, for example, if you were to say The Four Noble Truths is not definitive because it belongs to the first turning, right? Or, the teachings on emptiness, which belongs to the second turning, is not definitive. He says, well, we should be careful here. Because when we say that the Four Noble Truths are not definitive, we might give people the impression that, or even give ourselves, more so, we then might have the impression that I'm going to learn a higher truth that will cancel out what the Buddha said in the Four Noble Truths. Meaning, in this case, right, you might say, oh, the teachings of emptiness, are higher than the teachings of the Four Noble Truths. Then next step, oh, the teachings of Buddha nature, which belongs to the third turning, cancels out the teachings of emptiness in the second turning, which cancels out the teachings of the Four Noble Truths in the first turning. Khyalpa Rinpoche says, no, it's not like that. Nothing cancels nothing. That all teachings of the Buddha are based on the Buddha's fully and completely understanding the truth as it is. And he taught that truth in the ways that are most effective for the listeners. So in that way, all teachings are definitive. Again, this is a different Vajra statement. Getting ahead. But it's important, that we understand this. Other commentaries for statement 4 makes the point that when we say that the three turnings of the wheel were given in order to train the different types of disciples with different levels of maturity and capacity to understand the Dharma. When we say that, we should not think that therefore the Buddha taught the Dharma in accordance with what confused sentient beings like. Yeah, this seems like a minor point. That while he taught the single Dharma in various ways, taking into account the particular situation and combination of confusion, so to say, of this or that being at any given time, right? Don't make the mistake of thinking that the Buddha was teaching according to what confused beings like. This seems like a small point, but if you really think about it, it's not a small point. Because it actually happens that sometimes we think, whether as Dharma teachers or even as Dharma students, we might think, oh, the teacher is expressing the Dharma in that way because he knows, or she knows, like this guy, likes to party. And so, he's going to teach, the Dharma according to, how it would suit this guy's addiction to partying. Now, when Dharma teaches, do that. Based on what they think, students like to hear. And not based on knowing, like, I know this is a way that I can change this person's habits, habits of samsara. So there is a difference, between teaching in a way that is most effective to change this person, and teaching in a way that makes them feel good, makes them like you. We might feel, oh, I really like this teacher, I can hang out with her. He's so like one of us. We say all these things, She's like one of us. There's a fine line between, right? The teacher conducting himself in a way, speaking in a way that makes us feel like we can connect, we can relate. But be careful that the line doesn't turn into we're just a bunch of confused beings reinforcing each other's confusion under the guise of, oh, this is a dharma situation. When it's not, So it's important to pay attention to this seemingly minor matter. Statement 5. Furthermore, since the four truths of the noble ones are included in all three dharma wheels, Jigten Sumgun maintains that in each dharma wheel, the meaning of all three is included. So the Vajra statement is, in each dharma wheel, all the three are included. Now, Khenpo Kunpal chooses to, very short, his commentary for this is just one sentence. But he has chosen an easy, uncontroversial way of explaining this Vajra statement. In fact, this Vajra statement is more controversial, or you could say more thought-provoking, or you could also say more problematic for followers of Khyöpa Rinpoche to explain to other people how Khyöpa Rinpoche can say this. Because if you take literally what the Vajra statement is saying, it's not just saying that, as Khenpo Kunpal has chosen to explain it, that since the four truths of the noble ones are the basis of all three turnings, therefore, in each dharma wheel, the meaning of all three is included. He kind of, right? He interprets this statement as, oh, it's just saying that, Four Noble Truths, the principles of Four Noble Truths is in the first turning, is in the second turning, is in the third turning. But statement 5 is saying more than that. Statement 5 is saying, in each dharma wheel, the other two can be found. The other two can be found. So in the first turning, what is taught in the second and the third can be found in the first turning. In the second turning, what is taught in the first and the third can also be found. In the third turning, what is taught in the first and the second can be found. Now the last one, unproblematic. Yeah, of course, because the third is like the third floor of a building. So of course, to have the third floor of the building, Of course, you have the second floor and you have the first floor. No problem. Right? The next scenario, the second floor has the first floor and the third floor. Not necessarily, right? if you use that analogy of the floors, you can say no. The second floor doesn't have the third floor. At most, it has the first floor. Then much less to say the first floor contains the second and the third floor. But Khenpo Rinpoche actually, this Vajra statement actually says in each. And so therefore here, the analogy of the three turnings as the three floors of a building breaks down. So we cannot use that floor analogy. So we have to think of a different analogy. And right now I don't have one. But analogy in the end is used to illustrate a point. So the point to illustrate, the point here is Khenpo Rinpoche really feels, really can see how even in just the so-called first turning, where the Four Noble Truths are taught, where, careful observation of one's conduct of body, speech, and mind, knowing what to practice and what to give up, knowing the causes of happiness and the causes of suffering, practicing the causes of happiness and avoiding the causes of suffering. Even in those teachings, these teachings of that are more explicitly taught in the second turning, which is the teachings on emptiness and practices of bodhisattvas. They are already there. And the teachings of the third turning regarding the pristine or pure nature of mind is also already in the first turning. And beyond that, the teachings of Vajrayana can already be found in the first turning. And so Buddha says, not Buddha, Khenpo Rinpoche says, for example, the monastic rule for monks and nuns to practice giving up, sexual activity. He says this is basically the Vajrayana working in harnessing and controlling the subtle energies. It's the same. And so he said, if you cannot practice the first set, chances are you have no ability to work with these Vajrayana techniques of harnessing the power of subtle energies and redirecting them. So he says, these are directly, it's the same thing, it's just using different vocabulary. So that's statement 5, which Khenpo Kunpal decided to just pick the uncontroversial way and just say, oh, it's the first turning that is, present. The contents of the first turning is present in the second and in the third. He doesn't want to go in the direction of how to explain that the contents of the third can be found in the first. Because he comes from, and it's the mainstream, which wants to say that, whereas the later teachings, necessarily include the earlier. The earlier ones are inferior because they don't yet have what will come later, which has a certain logic to it, for sure. I mean, the opposite argument against Kyopa's understanding would be, well, if it's already in the first, why bother with the second and the third? That would be how one responds to Kyopa's position. And of course, Kyopa will say, well, actually, fundamentally, even that, the Buddha just taught the Dharma. He didn't, actually, first, second, third, that's all just based on temporary circumstances that you call, oh, this is first, this is second, this is third. At the end of the day, he just taught the Dharma to liberate beings. Then later on, you guys, when you compile all these things, you need a way to help you digest all these things, all these teachings. And so you have to organize them into 1, 2, 3. In other words, another way of saying is like, while the task of organizing and clarifying the Buddha's teachings is an important task, and thank goodness, the great successors of the Buddha for many generations have done that work, right? To arrange them, to clarify them, to put them in a systematic way. While all that activity has greatly benefited us, we should not get carried away by this kind of arranging into a system, placing this in this category, this in this category, this in this category, this in this category, that all those things, are subject to changes. Whereas the one single Dharma that the Buddha taught is always the same, one single Dharma. Buddha did not, sit there and think, oh, I'm going to go teach this particular group. So let's see, first turning, second, or third? He just taught the Dharma. Then later on, people looked at the content and said, this belongs to the second. So today we end here.